some of you, this is the fourth session of the day provided by Nerdio. It has been informative, hopefully helpful for most of you. The last session on pricing I thought was phenomenal. Will did a great job. And we're told that, you know, we have the cleanup hitter here batting fourth, right? The expert on it all, on packaging this. I think Vadim will share some of how we came up with the different packages and why they've been successful. And we've got, this session is being recorded, so don't worry about taking notes. We will share the slideshow if Vadim has one. I don't know if you do or not, Vadim, but that would be a good time to share your screen if you do. And if you don't, that's fine as well. And for those of you, oh, you do, fantastic. We will send out an email after the fact with copies of all the slides, as well as a link to our YouTube channel where all the recordings will live, and you will have contact info for everyone at Nerdio. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Vadim. I'm going to mute myself, and I'll be here if you need me, and I'll send you some warning messages as we go.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to today's class on how to productize Azure IT for MSPs. My name is Vadim Vladimirskiy and I'm the CEO of Nerdio. And in today's session, we are going to look at the process of putting together packages that are going to be easy to consume for your customers when trying to buy Azure. So we're going to look at the why, or actually first the what. What is the productization of Azure? What does that even mean? We're going to look at why you would want to productize, and then we're going to spend a few minutes looking at the how of productization. So let's start by asking the question of what is Azure IT productization? And in a nutshell, very simply, it is the process of selling complex IT system services in a predefined bundle that are easy for the MSP to quote, sell, deploy, service, and ultimately bill. The easiest examples to think about when it comes to productization of complex services are things like Microsoft 365 and Office 365, or any other SaaS or software as a service type package like QuickBooks Online, Salesforce, or thousands and thousands of other SaaS services that are out there. And there's obviously a huge trend of moving to that type of a transactional model. And in our session today, we're going to look at why that is and how it can be applied to Azure and IT and leveraged by MSPs to both the advantage of theirs for the MSP as well as the advantage of their customer. So let's start out by exploring why, as an MSP, you would want to productize Azure IT. And there's really two sides to this. There is the customer perspective, meaning why would the customer find it beneficial to purchase an IT service that's hosted in Azure in a productized, packaged kind of a way. And then there's also a set of reasons of why it is beneficial to the MSP to be able to transact in such a way, in a productized, packaged kind of way. So let's start with the customer perspective. And first and foremost, we need to realize that when purchasing SaaS type of services, or really any packaged solutions, technology solutions, there is a tremendous amount of simplification for the customer when it comes to selecting and purchasing their particular service. So if you think about why SaaS is so popular, it's because it really gives the power to the customer to make the purchasing decision rather than be sold to. So, how much more enjoyable is the process for a customer to be able to go and educate themselves on what's available, how much it's going to cost, what it is that they get in each package, and only then reach out to a salesperson to find out more information and actually make the purchase, or maybe even make the purchase directly online, rather than really not know what it is that they can buy and have to go through an entire sales process that in today's world, where customers are really used to doing a lot of that education in advance of talking to sales, That's something that they prefer, and that's something that productized packaged offers allow you as an MSP to deliver to them. This also creates transparency and trust when it comes to pricing. So when a customer can see what's available from a particular service provider and they know what the cost is going to be, they feel much better about engaging in a sales conversation because they already have sort of an anchored expectation of what it is that they're getting, of what it is they could get, and how much is going to cost them. It also shifts the conversation between sales and the customer to one about business benefits rather than conversation about specs and the technology. Because all of that information about specs and the technology is already publicly available. It's visible to the customer on your website. They can go in and they can see it all in advance. Certainly may have some questions about it that can be discussed, but the more important part of the conversation is what business benefit does a particular package provide to the customer and how it fits their particular environment. So that's benefit number one, simplified selection and a more enhanced purchasing experience. Number two is predictability of costs and the ability for the customer to budget in their IT spend. This is obviously huge, especially when you look at the opposite way of transacting Azure, which is more on a consumption basis. And if you try to do that, that becomes very challenging for most SMB customers because they are not expert in IT. They're certainly not experts in Azure. They don't know what every line item on an Azure invoice means. And lack of predictability of what the costs may be and lack of ability to budget for increases in IT spend is a tremendous amount of friction and a challenge in the sales process. So with a packaged offer, you're able to provide customers predictability and ability to budget, which means that, if you're selling let's use an example of Office 365 Business Premium or Microsoft 365 Business Premium. If your customer has 25 users this month and 27 users next month, they know exactly what their incremental cost for that package is going to be. And it should be the same for their overall IT spend as well. In an ideal world, they should be able to budget easily for increases in staff and such. Benefit to the customer number three is the ability of having one throat to choke in the shape of you, the MSP. So customers prefer to have a single point of contact. They want to know that they can call, one organization, one person, and be able to get their problem fixed, no matter whether it's an issue with Azure, Office 365, some service, any other piece of software. They like the fact that everything is bundled together and provided by their trusted MSP provider. And their MSP are the ones that they're going to call because they're getting everything in one place and they're able to have a single throat to choke whenever there is a problem. They feel like they will have more control in that situation. And finally, the billing is going to be much easier for the customer to understand. If you try to bill Azure on consumption basis to the customer, they're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to complain that this is, way too complicated and difficult for them to understand. If you try to list all the various SKUs and products that are inside of the Azure invoice. And therefore, when you try to package a solution and productize your offer together with Azure and everything else in one package, it makes the billing and the invoice easier for the customer to understand. So these are the benefits that the customer get. Now let's look at the reasons to productize from an MSP perspective. And these are even more compelling reasons than for the customer. And there are more of them, as you can see on the screen here. So let's look at the first one. The first one is really an easier and cheaper process to quote and sell a new customer solution. Now, why do I say that this is easier and cheaper to quote and sell? That's because most MSPs, especially when selling Azure, require the involvement of either a sales engineer or an implementation engineer to go in, to spec out the customer's environment, understand what they currently have, what is it going to take to migrate it to Azure, how to architect that solution, And that typically involves using your most stressed and most constrained resource that has all of the necessary skills to create a design, which then leads to a quote, which then leads to a negotiation, and then hopefully a signed contract and a proposal. Now, the challenge is that most MSPs don't close 100% of the business or of the proposals and quotes that they put out to customers, right? Some close more, higher percentage than others, but most don't close 100%, which means that during all of those times when you did not close the deal, the effort spent by your most expensive and most constrained resource, the individual who was building the design and creating the proposal and the quote, is really been wasted, right? Because it didn't result in a sale. So having a productized solution where everything is predefined and you need a very small amount of information from the customer in order to make a decision or in order to put together a proposal makes the process of selling and quoting much easier for you, the MSP, because now you're not using your most constrained resources. You can have your sales team do all of the quoting and selling without having to have the expertise in Azure, because all of that work has been done during the productization exercise, which is what was used to come up with all of these packages. Benefit number two to you, the MSP, is that when you bundle many services together, when you bundle the infrastructure from Azure, when you bundle Office 365 licensing, when you bundle your RMM and monitoring tools and help desk and other value-added services, maybe like backup and DR and quarterly business reviews, and you put them all together into a comprehensive package and bundle, the margin opportunities are naturally higher in such a situation, and it gives you more pricing power because you're including a lot more value in a package that is bundled, and the customers really don't have a way of shopping you on a line-by-line basis. They can say, well, you're charging me $13 or for a Office 365 business premium license. I can get it somewhere else for $12.50. If you have a bundle that's unique to you, then that's not something that they can do. They cannot shop you on a line-by-line basis. The third benefit is that you're building trust with pricing transparency. It is very liberating and very easy to go to the customer and say to them, here is what we offer. Here are the packages that we provide. Here is what's included. Here are the typical companies that choose one versus the other. And even before we start the discussion, even before I start learning about what it is you have, I can tell you that these are our transparent prices, and these prices are here for you to understand what it is, and I'm not going to change the price on you by realizing that your environment may be a bigger mess than a typical one, or maybe your need or your urgency is higher, which is a concern that a lot of customers have, is that somebody will take advantage of them. So building that trust with pricing transparency is something that makes the selling process easier for you, the MSP. Moving on to number 4, bundling and productizing allows you to differentiate with unique packaging and a way to target certain types of customers. If you think about the MSP space, almost every MSP's website and service mix looks very similar, at least to the customer. So a customer who's not an expert in IT, who doesn't understand all of the nuances of technology, when they look at one MSP or another MSP, they have a very tough time deciding which MSP to go with. Right. So, and they usually default to whom they trust, whom do they know, who came highly recommended, but it's very difficult to make an evaluation of one MSP versus the other purely based on the service mix that each one offers. Now, by productizing, you have the opportunity to strongly differentiate what you offer to customers by packaging it in a unique way that resonates with certain types of customers. So for example, if you service, legal, healthcare, and financial services, you may create packages that appeal specifically to those verticals, use the right terminology that appeal to those verticals and industries, giving and creating more of that trust up front that you know what you're doing and you're the right provider for this particular environment for a particular customer. So ability to differentiate from other MSPs is really key, and help you build value in your business and make it easier for customers to start trusting you, and also doesn't really doesn't have the opportunity for customers to shop you on price because of how differentiated your offering is from everyone else in the market. Number 5 on the list is the ability to standardize and automate the delivery of your services. So if you're selling something that is very standardized and productized, if you're selling, 3, 4, 5 different packages that are all structured in the same way, as you can imagine, that leads to the ability to script things, to automate things, to standardize, SOPs, and create a lot more scale and efficiency within your service delivery organization, whether that's provisioning and initially deploying the environments in Azure and elsewhere, or it is servicing them. It provides you with a much narrower set of things that you are doing, and thereby gives you the ability to be more efficient and automated in the way that you're delivering services to your customers. It also makes it simpler for you to bill. Not only can you bill your customers for just a small number of line items each and every month because you've packaged things together in a logical and consistent way, as opposed to billing them for hundreds of Azure SKUs, but it also gives you the opportunity to bill the customer in advance of them consuming the services later in the month. So for instance, as you know, with Azure, pricing is based on consumption. So you pay for what you've consumed over the prior month. And if you are going to be billing in such a way, that means that you will first have the customer consume the services, then you will get an invoice from your CSP provider or Microsoft, and only then can you create a bill and invoice for your customer, because now you know what it is that they've consumed. When you're dealing with a packaged offer, you're able to bill the customer at the beginning of the month before they've consumed anything. And then by the end of the month, when you actually get the bill from Microsoft, you've already been paid by the customer, assuming they're on net 30, in which case you now have more time to kind of carry that payment and be able to pay for your consumption to your CSP indirect provider after the customer has already paid you. And then finally, with packaged and productized offer, you have the ability to predictably build your MRR, your monthly recurring revenue, in such a way that is going to allow you to focus and build long-term value. By having a limited set of things that you offer to customers and providing that on a recurring monthly basis really shows the growth of your MRR, and thereby leads to higher business value in your organization. So now that we've spoken about what productization is, why you would want to do it both from a customer perspective and from an MSP perspective, let's look at some of the items on how to actually go about productizing Azure-based IT systems. So a few things to keep in mind, right? And these are just important to set expectations because it's not trivial and it's not necessarily a 5-minute exercise. We'll just look at it at a very high level, and then we'll leave you with some resources to go ahead and try to do this in your own practice. But it's going to really vary from one MSP to the other, and things are going to be very unique and customized to your own business. So some things to keep in mind. Number one, you will have to truly understand your current or desired customers. In order to create a logical and a successful productization strategy with your IT practice in Azure, you will really need to understand what it is your current customers want and need. Or if you're really trying to go after a new market, or you're new in the space and they're trying to sign up new customers, you need to understand your desired targeted market, what it is they want, what it is they need, what are they doing today, what are the shortfalls. So you really need to get intimate with the customer to understand their needs and wants. Number two, you have to realize you have to make trade-offs. And number three kind of goes hand in hand with number two, is you are going to have to say no, not only to certain technologies that may not fit what your current or desired customers want or need, but you will also often have to say no to some custom customer requests. If you decide to adopt a productization, a standardized strategy, you are going to have to resist the temptation to accommodate customers' unique requests that really don't fit into your overall strategy. Now, it doesn't mean you have to say no to every request, but it's something you are going to have to do, because part of productizing and part of realizing all of the benefits that we saw in the previous slide that we talked about for you as the MSP, you need to be able to say no. Otherwise, having a productized offer as well as a non-productized offer just doesn't go well together. Those two things don't work long-term side by side, because ultimately your productization strategy will just turn into an a la carte, kind of off the menu type of an offer eventually, if you're not going to make trade-offs and say no to some custom requests that customers may have. Finally, you're going to have to resist the temptation of having too many packages. You may say, well, I'm not really saying no. I don't want to say no to a customer. And instead of doing something very unique and custom and one-off, I'm just going to create a new package for that. And then eventually you kind of have this sprawl of too many different packages that are going to defeat the purpose of productizing and standardizing your practice. So you'll have to resist that temptation of having too many packages and really narrow it down to maybe 2 to 5, 2 to 4 packages that should cover 80% of the use cases that you've identified. And then you'll need to resign to the fact that if you want to really succeed, you are going to have to likely say no to 10 to 20% of customers that do not fit into those buckets that you'll define in advance. And then finally, realize that you will have to iterate by testing. You're unlikely to come up with an offer that works immediately right out of the box. I mean, it's certainly possible. And if you know your customers really well, that may be something that you can do, but it is unlikely. So setting your expectation that you're going to have to iterate and test before you finalize is important. So, create a package, go out to a handful of customers, pitch it to them, see what they like about it, what they don't like about it, go back to the drawing board and tweak things until you feel confident enough. Now, you don't have to be 100% confident. There's always room to adjust later on, but you should be open to iterating and testing before finalizing and launching. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is how we're going to go through the process of building an Azure offer. And before you start, you have to really define what that offer is. And there could be many shapes and sizes of this, but we'll use here as an example. Again, what I'm going to be showing you on subsequent slides is just sort of a high-level process with some of the details of how it's all going to culminate in a packaged solution for a very specific use case. And the specific use case we're going to talk about is a complete Windows Virtual Desktop-centric Azure IT environment that's inclusive of all hardware, software, support, and managed services, right? So this is sort of the ultimate goal of building an IT as a service solution that's going to give the customers a complete IT system that's going to be transacted in a SaaS manner, in a good, better, best type of a package that can be fully standardized and is going to leverage Azure with Windows Virtual Desktop at the core to deliver the entire suite of IT services, including our managed services and support and software licensing for things like Microsoft 365, etc. The next thing we have to think about is how many plans do we want to have in this particular offer? So as we mentioned, you probably never want to have anything more than 5. You probably don't want to have anything less than 2. So somewhere between 2 and 4 is typically the sweet spot. And the reason you want to have, not too many, I think, as we mentioned, is pretty obvious, because then if you have too many packages, it defeats the purpose of productization. It defeats the purpose of packaging, because that complicates the buying process, the service delivery process, the quoting process. So having a smaller number makes sense to keep the benefits intact. On the other hand, having only one package doesn't make sense, because then to the customer, it feels like you're taking away their choice. They don't really have, a large enough set to choose from, and that's not good either. So let's go with sort of middle of the road option of having 3 packages, good, better, best. In this case, we're going to call them professional, performance, and enterprise. And we will define what each of these particular plans, what type of a scenario, or what type of a persona is each one of these good for. So I'll just give you an example. Let's say professional is good for smaller organizations that have very basic compute needs, whereas enterprise may be something that is more appropriate for larger organizations that have very stringent data security, data protection, backup and DR requirements. And performance is somewhere in between those two, right? You may be a mid-sized organization that just needs to make sure that its users are productive and are working on a fast system, but they may not have all of the stringent data governance and data requirements as an enterprise organization, but they have more requirements than a professional organization. And one of the strategies in having a 3-plan type of an environment is that you really want to pick your mid-tier plan as your most profitable one, and you want to draw clear distinctions and clear differentiation between the lower end and the mid-tier and the higher end and the mid-tier plans. And the reason is you want to clearly show that the performance plan, or the mid-tier plan in this case, is the best value for the customer and the most advantageous. So you really are, giving customer the perception of choice, and you are giving them choice. You're giving them the ability to go professional if they're very price sensitive. You're giving them the ability to pay more and get all the bells and whistles if they are very non-price sensitive. But ultimately, you really are aiming to get the vast majority of your customers to go to that mid-tier plan, which is going to hopefully end up being as your most popular one. And you've also hopefully designed it in such a way that it has a very attractive margin profile, because that's where most of your customers should end up. Then you have to decide how to price each plan. Now, you can go about it by, sort of choosing a price point that you think makes sense. But there's also a more scientific approach to this. I think if you have an existing customer base to whom you're offering services, doing an analysis on your existing customer base and understanding, once you put all of the pieces together, how much they're paying on a per user basis, that's important. And then sort of mapping each customer to one of the plans that you've identified. If you've identified, you can have, silver, gold, and platinum, mapping each of your customers to each one of those plans, understanding how much they're currently paying, understanding whether you feel like you're undercharging, overcharging, or charging just right, and then using some of the data to calibrate your thinking about this packaging strategy. Now, once you put together these price points from your historical data of your existing customers, you really need to tweak them based on what the market looks like right now. Your current price points may be based on legacy and history, and may not necessarily be representative, but they're a good anchoring point to begin the pricing discussion and the pricing exercise of trying to come up with a price point for each one of these plans. And then, as I mentioned, at the end of this, we'll provide you with the link to an extensive white white paper that we created that covers everything we're discussing in much more detail and actually walks you through a case study on how to do all of this. And it is available in the Nerdio Academy, and we'll provide a link at the end of our class today. Okay, so if we've identified what the offer is IT as a service. It's a complete Windows virtual desktop-centric IT environment running in Azure that's inclusive of all the hardware, software, hosting, support, and managed services for our clients. We're going to choose to have 3 plans: Professional, Performance, and Enterprise, and we're going to price them at $125 per user per month, $175 and $250 respectively. Let's go and actually start this out. So now that we know we have our 3 plans and we've defined our offer as an all-inclusive IT as a service solution, let's see what that breaks down into. Again, this is not a blueprint for developing your offer. This is just an example of how you may go about thinking about the process of developing an offer. So, again, the numbers and the specific components here may not be as relevant in your situation, although some of it may be very relevant, but it is a good example of how you may go about it. So let's split this out into subcomponents, kind of high-level subcomponents. So in an IT as a service solution, in the type of offer we decided to create, we're going to have a desktop, which is going to be a virtual desktop in our scenario. We're going to have server infrastructure for things like domain controllers, file servers, application servers, etc. We're going to have any licensed software, things like Windows licensing, Office 365, maybe Azure Active Directory, any other third-party services like our RMM, our antivirus, those kinds of things. We're then going to have a set of security services and software, maybe AV, maybe content filtering. We're going to have management. So, using our RMM tool to monitor and manage proactively the customer's environment, patching, maybe part of the management bucket. And finally, we'll have services. And these could include things like help desk and quarterly business reviews, virtual CIO, whatever other type of services you may be providing to your customers. So these are some of the components we just mentioned. For example, on the infrastructure side of things, so the desktop and server, there's got to be some, specs that are involved. How much RAM, for example, does each desktop get? How much local storage? Same thing in the server infrastructure. How much total storage and RAM and backup and VPN tunnels are we going to allocate? And remember, everything we're doing is going to be on a per user per month basis. So to remember that it's important to keep our units in terms of our economic value, the value metric, which is per user per month. So then let's take a look at actually building out each one of our plans. So we said we're going to have professional, we're going to have performance, and we're going to have enterprise. Again, these are just examples. And you can see that if we go across the desktop bucket, then we're increasing the amount of RAM and the amount of storage per user, and also the type of storage from less performant to more performant as we go to the right. So for example, in the professional desktop, we're going to have 2 gigs of RAM, whereas in an enterprise desktop, we'll allocate 8 gigs of RAM per user, giving them obviously a lot more performance. Similarly, for local storage, we'll go from standard SSD on the professional to premium SSD and enterprise. Under server infrastructure, these are allocations of RAM and storage per user per month. So for example, under performance, we have 1 gigabyte of RAM per user per month. So if you have a customer with 20 users, that means the total pool of server infrastructure is going to be 20 gigabytes of RAM, which you can allocate for them across 1 or more server VMs, depending on the needs. Then you can have different types of backup with different redundancy levels, whether it's locally redundant, as in the case of professional and performance, or geo-redundant, as in the case of enterprise. Then we're going to have site-to-site VPNs. You can see how many of those are included depending on which plan you're with. And then we get into the licensed software section. This is where different versions of Windows, Office 365, Azure Active Directory, if you're using Nerdio to provision any of this and manage these packages, that you would integrate that into the pricing as well. And again, you can decide what makes sense. So for example, if we take Azure AD, with your professional plan, you're including the basic, which is free to you. It comes with Office 365. Whereas when you are working on the performance, you get the premium plan 1, and enterprise, you get premium plan 2 that gives you additional security features with things like conditional access and other security features that come with Azure Active Directory. Same thing on the security and the management and the services. For instance, if you're looking at providing end user help desk, you may want to distinguish each plan by the service hours that you offer. So with a professional plan, you may offer a 8x5 support. With performance, you may offer 12x5. And with enterprise, you may offer 24/7. And then you need to build out some cost and pricing and margin information. So how do you do this? So the first thing you got to do is, based on your selected specs, you need to figure out, well, what are the unit costs for each one of those selections? And you list those out next to each one of those items. So for example, if you're selling an Office 365 E3 SKU and you're getting at the high end 20% discount, right, which is probably a little bit higher than realistic, then your cost is going to be $16. Then you have to decide how much you're going to sell it if it was at list, and figure out what the respective margin is. And as you can see here, most of your margin is really coming from your add-on services, not so much from the infrastructure and the licensed software. So you basically build this out as having all of your costs in one column next to each selected spec, having your list price, which is something that you can stick to, or you could actually go above list price, because as you bundle it all together, you're not really breaking out the costs and the list prices of each component. So there's really no direct way to compare it with other providers. And then once you roll all of this up together, what you end up with is a matrix that looks like this, that basically shows you what each plan is at the price that you've selected, right? So you selected the price of 125, 175, and 250, and you've calculated the cost of each one of these components, which in this case is $62, $86, and $122. And that comes from just adding up the cost column for each and every item in this list here, and getting the resulting gross margin. And this is just a good way to calibrate whether the costs and the prices you've selected are at the right level. Again, price is going to be market driven for the most part. The costs are going to be primarily driven by what you decide to include, and also what your volume is. Higher the volume on certain things, the lower your costs are. So your margin may be somewhat sensitive to it, but it's good to look at it at a high level and see, okay, what is my blended margin, my blended gross margin on the selected price point, given the costs of each subcomponent in my package. And I think a good rule of thumb would be that your gross margin should be somewhere between 40 and 60%. You should target 50% maybe as kind of the mid-tier. And that is really a good rule of thumb, because it is possible to do. It's possible to get 50% gross margin on price points in this range, right? So 125, 175, 250, those are certainly not unreasonable prices in most markets for a complete IT as a service solution. And if you can deliver the service in a consistent, standardized, predictable way that is easy for customers to understand, to purchase, and to pay for, then you're going to be able to realize a very significant margin and build a very successful recurring revenue model with an MRR that just increases month after month as your customers grow and you sign up additional customers at a very healthy margin, and build a tremendous amount of long-term business value. So that is our class on developing our Azure productization offers. Just to summarize, we spoke about what productization is, and that is a way of selling a bundled offering of complex IT services as if you're selling a SaaS solution. We talked about why it is something that you would want to do, and there's two perspectives to it. There is the perspective of the MSP and the perspective of the customer. The customer gets a whole set of benefits in buying IT in the way that they would expect to buy software, which makes it very attractive to them. And also from the MSP perspective, it gives you lots of benefits in building long-term value of your operation. We talked about the how of creating of these packages, talked about some of the expectations you need to have, that you will have to make trade-offs, you will have to say no to certain custom requests, you will have to iterate and test before you finalize. And then we also went through an example process of building an IT as a service offer by choosing the number of plans we want to have, the price point, and then building out the subcomponents and the associated costs to calculate our margin. Hopefully you found this useful. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions, and we will also be sharing both the deck and a link to our white paper that walks you through this process in a lot of detail and helps you go step by step in developing an offer for your MSP practice.
Great, thanks, Vadim. So anyone have any questions for Vadim? I know it's been a long 4 hours of Azure and Nerdio for some of you. Any questions? Either in the chat window or speak up.
No questions. I guess it has been very long, multiple hours.
Yeah, it has, but very informative, Vadim. Thank you very much, and all the sessions were excellent. We're receiving feedback from our members throughout, and I know you guys will hear from us and some of our members and some of the invited guests as they go.
That's great. That's great. One thing I promised is to share that link. So let me just quickly paste that into the chat. Give me 1 second, please, to open that up. So on the Nerdio Academy, we have a whole section on creating Azure offers, and this is it. And I'm going to paste that into the chat right now. And there it is.
Fantastic. I'll leave that there for a minute or so everyone can jump in there. Great job by Will and Joseph and Tony as well. We've never done one of these where it's been 4 separate presentations, one right after another.
Great. Well, we're very happy to participate, and then very happy to be able to share this this content and some of our experience in this area. So definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. You saw my my info on the slide. It's vadim@getnerdio.com. Feel free to reach out to me directly, or really any of us at Nerdio, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions or help you in any way we can.
Thanks, Vadim. Thank you, everybody else, for participating.